and welcome to the WWE episode of Fandom Fanatic. I started watching around the end of the Attitude Era. For those that don't know, most people consider the end of the Attitude Era to be when Stone Cold Steve Austin joined forces with Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 17 in 2001 so he could beat The Rock and regain the WWF Championship. Having said that, there are even some that think it lasted as long as 2006. This is because a lot of the controversial aspects that defined the Attitude Era still existed well into 2006. The reason I was a huge fan of wrestling at the time actually had nothing to do with, wrestling. Not that I didn't like those parts, but what I loved were the storylines, the characters, and probably most of all, the entrances. I bought up all the entrance music CDs that they would come out with and listened to them over and over and over again. My favorite wrestler at the time was definitely Chris Jericho. I loved his entrance, his attitude, pretty much everything about him. I always thought his finisher, the Walls of Jericho, was one of the coolest too, on the same level with ones like the Rock Bottom or the Stone Cold Stunner. It was just great to see. The only wrestling-themed shirt I ever got, however, was the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels. It was just a black shirt with the massive letters HBK in a white square. I loved how simple it was, and to people who didn't get it, it just looked like a normal shirt. But to people who got it, you get a, hey, great shirt, comment. That's a perfect shirt to me, just like my Sunnydale High School t-shirt. If you don't get it, you probably think it's just from a school I went to or I have a kid that goes there. But if you get it, you notice the flames and the fangs subtly put into the back of the logo and realize it's a Buffy the Vampire Slayer t-shirt. My favorite championship belt at the time was the Hardcore Championship, especially when it became a belt that had to be defended 24/7. Sometimes it even had to be defended as much as 10 times on the same night. Mankind, aka Mick Foley, was the first Hardcore Champion, being awarded to it by Vince McMahon after turning heel. Heel is the wrestling way of saying he became a bad guy, and babyfaces were the good guys. Crash Holly was the one who made it the 24 championship, however. This led to matches in an airport, at an amusement park, and even inside a bounce house. The belt wasn't taken seriously, but that's kind of what I loved about it. It was the comic relief belt. It was retired in 2002, but in 2019, Mick Foley introduced a new belt called the 24/7 Championship, which operates in a very similar way that the Hardcore belt did when it was a 24/7 belt. I went to 2 different live WWE shows during my fandom. One was a house show here in Portland at the Rose Garden with my brother and his friends. As a side note, this was back when Arby's still had their 5 for 5 deal, and that's what we had before the show. I wish that deal still existed. Anyways, a house show means that it wasn't filmed for television. The best part was definitely seeing the Dudley Boys. I believe they even did the 3D, which is pretty dope. That is their signature move that Bubba Ray and Devon did together. I also attended WrestleMania 19 with my younger brother, which was held at Safeco Field on March 30th, 2003. It was the first WrestleMania in Washington, and the first WrestleMania after the WWE draft was introduced, causing SmackDown and Raw to have different rosters. Because of this, it was considered a joint promotional pay-per-view event, as it had wrestlers from both promotions. Ashanti sang America the Beautiful to open things off. Limp Bizkit later played both the song Crack Addict live, which was the theme of WrestleMania that year, and Rollin', which was Undertaker's theme at the time during his American Badass phase. Some actually consider it to be the best WrestleMania of all time. There were some really great matches, like Matt Hardy versus Rey Mysterio, Jericho against Shawn Michaels. There was even a surprise interference by Roddy Piper during the main event of Vince McMahon versus Hulk Hogan. He hadn't appeared in the WWE since the mid-90s, I believe, so it was quite the surprise. One thing I remember vividly as well was suddenly during a commercial break, this footage came on the giant screen above the ring, announcing that Goldberg was finally coming to the WWE. Goldberg was a very popular wrestler for WCW before they went out of business. A lot of wrestlers came over to the WWE when that happened, but there were some very noticeable absences, including Goldberg. In hindsight, we know a lot of the more famous wrestlers did this because as long as they didn't wrestle anywhere else, they were allowed to finish out their contracts that they had with the WCW before it went under. and got paid for literally doing nothing. The problem is, by the time a lot of them finally did come to the WWE, they were either really out of shape or getting too old to put on the same performances they once did. Then there was the other problem of them getting booked really, really badly. For example, like when they had Diamond Dallas Page play a really creepy stalker. The storylines they were put in were really bad. And the dream matches all the fans wanted, like Stone Cold vs. Goldberg or Undertaker vs. Sting, didn't happen because they didn't immediately book these matches when given the opportunity. And then one of the wrestlers would inevitably get too injured to ever make it happen, which happened in both these cases with both Stone Cold and Sting. I primarily just watched SmackDown on UPN because we didn't have cable. I really look forward to Thursdays because of it. I also got a lot of wrestling action figures around that time too, and played the video games. The 3 SmackDown video games for the PlayStation 1 and then the PlayStation 2 are by far the best wrestling video games that have ever been made. They just got everything right, especially the control system. I haven't played any recent entries into wrestling video games, but I've heard they are pretty awful. I also used to read a lot of wrestling autobiographies like Chyna, Goldberg, and most notably, Mick Foley. I said earlier Chris Jericho is my favorite wrestler at the time, but if you ask me now who my favorite wrestler ever was, I would say Mick Foley. I was actually lucky enough to get my well-loved paperback copy of his original book signed by him. He did a book signing at a car show being held at the Portland Expo Center. I went for the explicit reason of getting my book signed by the legend. What I didn't expect is, after I paid and went in, that line would snake back and forth across the entire massive exhibit hall. I found the end of the line, and already people were saying around me that there was no way he would stay long enough to get to us. There's one kid in front of me, though, who said he was on the radio last night and said no matter what, he would get through the line of everyone who came. After reading his book, I kind of felt like I knew him in a way. And I felt like if he said this, then it was true. Foley can endure anything, and when he says he's going to do it, he may end up disfigured in the end, but he's going to do it. Based on the time it said in the poster, though, he was only going to be there for 1 more hour. Closing in on this hour, a worker came to our part of the line and said that if we wanted to wait anyways, we could, but that there was no chance he was going to make it to us. A few of us left at this news, but me, nah. I had to see the legend. I had to know he was real. Sure, I could have got out of line and just walked by the area he was in, but that just wasn't good enough for me. I really wanted to spend those few seconds with him, sitting in a chair across from me, signing my book for me. It was important to me for some reason. The line had gotten stale, though. It didn't move at all. At about a half hour after he was supposed to leave, the rumors started to grow that they were going to disband about half the line and make us leave. Then an hour passed, still barely moving. Then they finally sent an employee to the end of the line to stop people from getting back into the line. Then, out of nowhere, it started picking up. We actually started moving at a really good pace. Another employee came walking down the line and said that we could only get one thing signed each, and we couldn't talk to him as he was hurrying to get to everyone and still make his flight. I got up to him and was so happy to have him sign my book, I just shouted, "Thank you," as he did it, grabbed it, and walked away. This true legend stayed there 3 hours after his stated end time to sign something for everyone in that line. I have no idea if he made that plain, but I hope he did. Well, I think that about does it. But you know what? If you have an interesting story about the WWE or would like more stories from me or anything like that, please let me know. And maybe you could come on the podcast and speak. Or maybe you could tell a specific story you want me to tell or something to that effect. Let me know. But I think I'll end it by a quote by Mick Foley. "Shut your roll and know your mouth. Have a nice day."